Greetings, family. Welcome back to the educational YouTube channel. I appreciate you tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about the Melanin Man and sports controversy. We have a whole lot going on in the media, and we need to understand history. We need to read. We need to understand things that have happened in the past to kind of understand what's happening now. You just think about it. This is going into 2023. And if you think about that, 1863 is when we had so-called Emancipation Proclamation, where people were freed from the enslavement in this country. So if we look at the dates, it's like 160 years ago. So 160 years ago, there's this whole slave mentality about how things operated. Well, we are still operating under that mentality because we haven't not made the adjustments. Black people, melanin dominant people have a lot to offer, and their skills are being exploited. And so the sports arena becomes a perfect environment for their skills to be exploited. So what we're going to do today is just talk about some books and basically some history about where people have been and names that you may not have heard of, but we got to understand their stories because their stories explain why we have such challenges today. One figure who began with a lot of sports controversy was Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson is Ken Burns did this video or documentary series on him called Unforgivable Blackness, the rise and fall of Jack Johnson. They couldn't knock him out, so they tried to tear him down. We see that happening all the time with these athletes in the media, just saying something, just speaking up, they get torn down. Why? Because we're not controlling the system. Even though we're playing in the system, we're not controlling the system. So Jack Johnson was 18. He was born in 1878 and died in 1946. Now, I'm going to show you a book later on. There's a book about this called Unforgivable Blackness, the rise and fall of Jack Johnson. So it's off the video documentary off the book. But check this out. It says, because he was an athlete. He wanted to do something. And if you look at the video, he was fighting white people during a time period where black people weren't supposed to be able to do that. No. So he was almost bare knuckle gloves. I mean, he was beating people down. He had 18 rounds, 19 rounds. I mean, they were some vicious fights, but a black man doing this during that time period. So you know what they called him? Ethiopian. Ethiopian. He's from Texas. But they wanted to make sure you knew that you wouldn't be doing that. Didn't want any more black people rising up like that. But he wanted to do other sports, and he tried. It says, but despite the odds, there were still black sports stars for young Johnson to dream of emulating. He venerated the jockey Isaac Murphy, who won at least a third of all the races in which he rode and may have been the greatest rider in U.S. track history. Never heard of him, though, huh? Johnson lost his job at Galveston Livery Stable when he exhausted one of the horses in his charge, racing with his friends in unauthorized imitation of his idol. When he finally realized he was simply too big to be a jockey, he turned to bicycle racing, seeking to follow the tracks of Marshall Major Taylor, the Indiana-born colored wonder who had begun breaking records in the face of jeering crowds and sabotage from white competitors. Johnson entered a 5-mile race at Galveston, he remembered, fell rounding a curve, and injured his leg. A week or so in bed convinced him that he should abandon bicycling too. So that's when he then picked up boxing. So Major Taylor, awesome story. This guy dominated cycling. But you don't hear his story. I have another book to show you where that comes from too, where people talk about this. You may have seen that commercial with Nas talking about, I think it's Hennessy, and they had a brother riding around in like a velodrome or track racing, and so that was Major Taylor. And basically, can you believe that both Taylor and Johnson were born around the same time? So just in terms of the people who were trying to change the world, Jack Johnson is one of them. Of course, then he started messing around with a white woman, and so they started really going after him because he was flaunting his pride too much. So 20 years later, after Jack Johnson, we have Paul Robeson, another name you have to know, must know. So 20 years born after Jack Johnson. So he was during that same time period where they weren't respecting black people too much. But he went to he went to Rutgers University for his undergrad. He was All-American. He was going to go to Lincoln University where his brother went. Or, I went to Lincoln University, try to always push the first HBCU distributed degree to African Americans, 1854, Lincoln University. But he decided to go to Rutgers, because he was a superstar. He was running things. He was football man, but again, he was being sabotaged and being attacked, but he stood tall. He moved on and became a world-renowned opera singer. Basically, he was a Renaissance man. He did everything. Went on the guy's law degree. I want to play something for you in terms of seeing white people attack him, and he stood firm on his position, because we have the same things happen today. But this is an educated black man. That's the most dangerous black man or melanated man sometimes, those who have education. Paul Robeson, if you ever read information about his story, Here I Stand. It's a documentary or a biography on his work, his life. But the brother was tremendous. And in Russia, they even have not a hill, they have a mountain named after Paul Robeson. So let me see if I can play. He was being harassed by the U.S. House Un-American Committee. It's called HUAC. And that's still in existence today. When they try to question black, or just question people about their so-called, not heritage, but their ability to support American activities, when reality is they just want to be universal and support progress for all people on the planet. Let me see if I can play this for you.
The first thing I tell new clients worried about memory loss as they age, throw your popcorn in the...
Now, Mr. Robeson,
do I have the privilege of asking who is addressing me?
I'm Richard Ahrens.
What is your position?
I'm director of the staff. Did you file a passport application in July 2, 1954?
I have filed about 25 in the last few months.
In July of 1954, were you requested to submit a non-communist affidavit?
Under no conditions would I think of signing such an affidavit. It is a contradiction of the rights of American citizens.
Are you now a member of the Communist Party?
Oh, please.
Please answer, will you, Mr. Robeson?
What is the Communist Party? What do you mean by that?
Are you now a member of the Communist Party?
Would you like to come to the ballot box when I vote and take out the ballot and see?
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully suggest the witness be directed to answer the question.
You are directed to answer the question.
I invoke the Fifth Amendment and forget it.
I respectfully suggest the witness be directed to answer the question whether, if he gave us a truthful answer, he would be supplying information which might be used against him in a criminal proceeding.
You are directed to answer, Mr. Robeson.
In the first place, wherever I have been in the world, the first to die in the struggle against fascism were the communists. I laid many wreaths upon the graves of communists. That is not criminal. Chief Justice Warren has been very clear that the Fifth Amendment does not have anything to do with the influence of criminality, and I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Have you ever been known under the name of John Thomas?
Oh, please, does somebody here want me to put up a perjury someplace? John Thomas, my name is Paul Robeson, and anything I have to say, I have said in public all over the world, and that is why I'm here today.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that you direct the witness to answer the question. He's making a speech.
I ask you to affirm or deny the fact that your Communist Party name was John Thomas.
I invoke the Fifth Amendment. This is really ridiculous.
The witness talks very loud when he makes a speech, but when he invokes the Fifth Amendment, I can't hear him.
I have medals for diction. I can talk plenty loud.
Will you talk a little louder?
I invoke the Fifth Amendment loudly.
Sir, who are Mr. and Mrs. Vladimir
I
Nikiev?
invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Do you know a Manning Johnson?
I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Do you know Gregory Kifitz?
I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Do you know a Max Jurgen?
I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Max Jurgen.
Why don't you have these people here to be cross-examined? Could I ask whether this is legal?
This is not only legal, but usual. By unanimous vote, this committee has been instructed to perform this very distasteful task.
To whom am I talking?
You're speaking to the chairman of the committee.
Mr. Walter?
Yes.
The Pennsylvania Walter?
That is right.
Representative of the steel workers?
That is right.
And the coal mining workers?
That is right.
Not United States Steel by any chance. A great patriot.
That is right.
You are the author of the bills that are going to keep all kinds of decent people out of the country.
No, only your kind.
Colored people like myself. And you would let in the Teutonic Anglo-Saxon stock.
We are trying to make it easier to get rid of your kind, too.
You don't want any colored people to come in. Could I be allowed to read from my statement?
Will you just tell this committee, please, while under oath, Mr. Robeson, the communists who participated in the preparation of that statement?
Oh, please. The reason I'm here today, from the mouth of the State Department itself, is I should not be allowed to travel because I have struggled for the independence of the colonial peoples of Africa. The other reason I'm here today, again, from the State Department and from the record of the Court of Appeals, is that when I am abroad, I speak out against injustices against the Negro people in this land. That is why I'm here. I'm not being tried for whether I'm a communist. I'm being tried for fighting for the rights of my people, who are still second-class citizens in this country, in this United States of America. My mother was born in your state, and my mother was a Quaker. My ancestors, in the time of Washington, baked bread for George Washington's troops when they crossed the Delaware. My father was a slave. I stand here struggling for the rights of my people to be full citizens in this country. And we are not. We are not in Mississippi. We are not in Montgomery, Alabama. We are not in Washington. We are nowhere. And that is why I'm here today. You want to shut up every Negro who has the courage to stand up and fight for the rights of his people, for the rights of workers. And I have been on many a picket line for the steel workers, too. And that is why I'm here today.
Would you tell us whether or not you know Thomas W. Young?
I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Thomas W. Young is a Negro president of the Guide Publishing Company. I'd like to read you his testimony, quote, Paul Robeson has no moral right to place in jeopardy the welfare of the American Negro to advance a foreign cause. In the eyes of the Negro people, this false prophet is unfaithful to their country, and they repudiate him, close quote. Do you know the man that said that?
I invoke the Fifth Amendment now. Can I read my statement? It is a sad and bitter comment.
While you were in Paris in 1949, Mr. Robeson, did you tell an audience the American Negro would never go to war against the Soviet government?
May I say that is slightly out of context? May I explain to you what I did say? I remember the speech very well. 2,000 students who came from populations that would range to 600 or 700 million people asked me to say in their name that they did not want war. No part of my speech in Paris says 15 million American Negroes would do anything. I said it was my feeling that the American people would struggle for peace, and that has been since underscored by the President of these United States. Now, in passing, I said...
Do you know any people who want war?
Listen to me. I said it was unthinkable to me that any people could take up arms in the name of a man like Senator Eastland of Mississippi against anybody. Gentlemen, I still say that. This United States government should go to Mississippi and protect my people. That is what it should do.
I lay before you, sir, an article, quote, I am looking for full freedom, unquote, by Paul Robeson in The Worker. July 3rd, 1949, quote, I said it was unthinkable that the Negro people of America or elsewhere could be drawn into war with the Soviet Union. I repeat it with 100-fold emphasis, they will not, close quote.
And, gentlemen, they have not. It is clear that no Americans are going to go to war with the Soviet Union.
While you were in Stockholm, did you make a little speech?
I made all kinds of speeches.
Let me read you a quotation.
Let me listen.
Do so, please.
I am a lawyer.
It would be a revelation if you would listen to counsel.
In good company, I usually listen. But you know, people wander around in such fancy places.
You said, Mr. Robeson, and I quote, I belong to the American resistance movement, which fights against American imperialism. just as the resistance movement fought against Hitler.
Just like
Close
Frederick
quote.
Douglass and Harriet Tubman were underground railroaders and fighting for our freedom, you bet your life.
I have to insist that you listen to these questions.
I am listening.
I quote further, why should the Negroes ever fight against the only nation in the world where racial discrimination is prohibited and where the people can live freely? Never. They will never fight against either the Soviet Union or the people's democracies, close quote. Did you make that statement?
I do not remember, but what is perfectly clear today is that 900 million people, other colored people, have told you they will not. 400 million in India and millions everywhere have told you
The
that.
witness has answered the question. He doesn't need to make a speech.
Did you write an article that was published in the USSR Information Bulletin?
Yes.
Quote, I want to emphasize that only here in the Soviet Union did I feel that I was a real man with a capital M, close quote.
I would say, what is your name?
Arendt.
I am quite willing to answer the question. When I was a singer years ago, and this you will have to listen to.
I am listening.
I am a bass singer, so for me, it was Chelyabin, the great Russian bass, not Caruso the tenor. I learned the Russian language to sing their songs. I wish you would listen now.
Mr. Chairman, I ask you to direct the witness to answer the question.
Just be fair with me.
I ask for order.
The great poet of Russia is of African blood.
Let us not go
It
so
is
far
important to
afield.
explain this.
Did you make that statement?
When I first went to Russia in 1934...
Did you make that
When I
statement?
first went to Russia in
Did you make
1934...
that statement?
In Russia, I felt for the first time like a full human being. No color prejudice like in Mississippi. No color prejudice like in Washington. It was the first time I felt like a human being. When I did not feel the pressure of color as I feel it in this committee today.
Why do you not stay in Russia?
Because my father was a slave, and my people died to build this country. And I'm going to stay here and have a part of it just like you, and no fascist-minded people will drive me from it. Is that clear?
You are here because you are promoting the communist cause.
I am here because I'm opposing the neo-fascist cause, which I see arising in these committees. Jefferson could be sitting here, and Frederick Douglass could be sitting here. Eugene Debs could be sitting here.
Now, what prejudice are you talking about? You were graduated from Rutgers. You were graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. I remember seeing you play football at Lehigh. There was no prejudice against you.
Just a moment. This is something I challenge very deeply, that the success of a few Negroes can make up for $700 a year for thousands of Negro families in the South. My father was a slave, and I have cousins who are sharecroppers. I do not see success in terms of myself. I have sacrificed hundreds of thousands of dollars for what I believe in.
While you were in Moscow, Mr. Robeson, did you make a speech lauding Stalin?
I can't remember.
Have you recently changed
What
your
has
mind
happened
about
to
Stalin?
Stalin, gentlemen, is a question for the Soviet Union, and I won't argue with a representative of the people who, in building America, wasted the lives of my people. You are responsible, you and your forebears, for 60 to 100 million black people dying in the slave ships and on the plantations. Don't you ask me about anybody.
I'm sure you wouldn't want to discuss with us the slave labor camps in the
Nothing
Soviet
could be built
Union.
more on slavery than this society, I assure you.
I would invite your attention to the Daily Worker of June 29, 1949, with reference to a get-together with you and Ben Davis, formerly communist councilman in New York. Do you know Ben
One
Davis?
of my dearest friends. He is as patriotic an American as can be, and you, gentlemen, are the non-patriots.
Just a minute.
Are the un-Americans.
The hearing is now adjourned.
I think it should be.
I've been doing all of this that I can.
Can I read my statement?
No! The meeting is adjourned.
It should be.
Wow. Can you imagine seeing that on regular TV? Can you imagine seeing that and hearing this brother speak on regular TV? No. They don't want you to hear that. So Paul Robeson, as a patriot, I mean, you heard him talking about Mississippi. Look what we had going on in Mississippi in 2022 when they had the water crisis. And the government and then the state did nothing because they created the situation. Again, we were 160 years outside of Emancipation Proclamation, and we had the same dynamics going on with slavery back then. You heard Paul Robeson. You heard all the diversion tactics where they tried to grill him saying that he was unpatriotic. It's the same thing that goes on today. Imagine if Kyrie Irving was able to have that kind of backing with him to defend himself against unjust attacks. Imagine if he had Louis Farrakhan sitting with him again, talking with the uh, elements that are attacking him, saying that he's anti other people. Imagine if he had the knowledge base like a Paul Robeson. So I'm just trying to explain that, look, Paul Robeson was a tremendous force. You have to know his name. Listen to his words. You just heard him. Another brother, Arthur Ashe, did his best to change the game of tennis. And, I like playing tennis. So for me, I respect what he's done. Basically, he's the only black man to ever win the singles title at Wimbledon, U.S. Open, and Australian Open. So for him, he was a trailblazer. He wasn't the only black tennis player. He had, Althea Gibson and other players that came before and did some things, but he became more political and started helping out with, I believe, the apartheid regime there in South Africa, tried to remove apartheid from the society. So he was a political figure and just happened to die of AIDS from a blood transfusion. Interesting, huh? So Arthur Ashe, 1943, 1993. So basically he was during the time period where we had maybe not a lot going on in sports, but there were some other things that were going on we don't know of names. So 1943. So I just showed you Arthur Ashe. If I showed you a picture, you probably would know what that is. You probably don't even know what this is. I'll give you one moment to just try to figure out and guess. Phillies just played in the World Series and didn't do too well because they lost. But if you look at the team, not many Melanin-dominated people. I would probably say none. I didn't watch it, but I just heard there wasn't much representation. But you look at somebody like Dick Allen. This is Dick Allen. His brother struggled to try to change the game. He was a superstar, helped the Phillies. He passed away with a pandemic in 2020. So if you didn't know his name, you need to know his name. He was a member of the Phillies during two separate stints from the 60s and 70s. Allen was one of Philadelphia's first black stars, but endured racial harassment and bullying during his time in Philly. He died, again, 2020. So harassment. A lot of players get harassed and we don't hear the stories that are going on, and it has a lot to do with people feeling animosity towards these players that are speaking up. He was trying to change the game in terms of finances. He should have got paid much better than he was, and he was talking about all that. In July 1965, Allen famously got in a fist fight with teammate Frank Thomas, a white player, who wound up getting released after he swung a bat at Allen and struck him in the shoulder. Fans and the local press, who had already resisted Allen's stardom, considered him responsible for costing a white player his job. And in this economy and capitalism, it's all about jobs. So you want to keep black people or other people, competitors, away from getting good jobs, so you now maintain what control over society. Well, Dick Allen had to wear a helmet in the field because white people throwing bottles at him, and he couldn't even play the game properly, but he was a dominating figure. So without knowing the struggles of those came before us. So since 1942 he was born. You see Arthur Ashe is around the same time born, and you think of 1942, just think about Jackie Robinson, in terms of 1942, the movie. Have you ever seen a movie called 1942 starring Chadwick Boseman? May his soul rest in peace. Wait, Jackie Robinson's soul rest in peace. Again, people have fought and struggled, but we have to know the names. So 68 Olympics, John Carlos, you know the story. But perhaps you don't know the story because you don't read history. But he told his own story years later. So he was accused and condemned for what he did in the Olympics about raising his fist. I'll try to read something a little later on about what he was doing and why he did that. But you can buy his book, John Carlos' story. Still alive, still around, trying to wake up people. Try to do it back then. So he started the kind of trail for others to start speaking up about protesting in sports. So John Carlos, you got to know his name. He and Tommy Smith, when they got in the Olympics, and he had an Australian, I believe, runner, a white Australian runner who also tried to protest along with him. But this is when people started organizations try to squash people having protests in major sports venues. So Craig Hodges did not know the name. He used to play with the Bulls. Craig Hodges was a 3-time 3-point titles champion. That means he could shoot. This is way before Steph Curry doing his thing now. He won some championships with the Bulls. Hey, they got a chance to go to the White House. You see on the side there, he's visiting the White House wearing his African garb. He's representing who he is as an African person living here in America. He's meeting there with Daddy Bush. He wanted to give a letter to Daddy Bush to give it to the press secretary, because just give it to can't give it just to the president. So he had a conversation and, said, this is what I think about what's going on in the United States, and we could do help out, make some changes. So it was greeted well at that moment, but he was then whiteballed after that. He was 32 years old, dominating in basketball, and never got a contract after that. Why? Because he's trying to raise the consciousness of his people, not selling out for some shoe deals, not selling out his soul because he wants to make more money. No, he's trying to help his people out. He just hold Pearl Rosen, talk about Mississippi, and here we are now. Mississippi still doesn't have what they need in 2022, going to 2023. So Craig Hodges, look up his story. Look at how he was whiteballed by the NBA, and what you see what's going on with Kyrie. It's nothing new. Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, the Nuggets, brother to shoot. The brother said, you know what? I'm not standing for this national anthem because of what's going on in America and in society. So this is 2 decades before Colin Kaepernick's protests, oppression and tyranny during the national anthem. So this former NBA star was also whiteballed. And so he lost a lot of money because he was taking a stand on, again, the representation of his people. People getting beat down, oppressions all around, and we're supposed to just close our eyes and ignore that. No, we need to pay attention to it. So there are many athletes. And again, I'm not a sports writer, not a sports journalist, just a psychohistorian trying to break it down for you that there are other stories that you need to know. So of course, Colin Kaepernick is on our minds because he took a knee. But if you saw athletes not supporting Colin Kaepernick, well, why would they support Kyrie Irving? It's the slave game, money game. Well, this brother took a stand. And in fact, if we don't support what he has been trying to do, just trying to talk about oppression, we continue to ignore that, it'll continue to exist. So, again, much respect for Colin Kaepernick trying to carry on that tradition of what the other athletes before him did. So when you're talking about books, $40 Million Slaves by William Roden. Now, that's a sports journalist. You have to get that book for your library. William Roden, he broke it down. So many jewels and gems in this. When I read about Major Taylor in this book, about the cyclist. Both Johnson, that is Jack Johnson, and Major Taylor were born in 1878. Johnson on March 31st in Galveston, and Taylor November 26th outside Indianapolis. And I have a colleague who told me that, there's a museum there in Indianapolis for Major Taylor. But back in the day, those white folks didn't even honor his body. He passed away, and they had him some grave site way away from Indianapolis. And just the whole disrespect of this brother dominating a event that we weren't representing. And that's how it usually goes when those who are, out there doing their thing and, trying to, address the slave system. Look at this. This is about integration. White America determined the pattern of integration. The white power structure chose blacks who made whites feel comfortable, who more or less accepted the vagaries of racism. This was the Jackie Robinson model of how an integration-worthy African American behaved, taking abuse, turning the other cheek, tying oneself in knots, holding one's tongue, never showing anger, waiting for racist sensibilities to smolder and die out, if your spirit didn't die first. This model was hardly progress for black athletes. It was, in fact, a reversal of the paradigm for black involvement in sports that Foster and others created out of hard necessity. So Foster was from the Negro League, We had our own black league in baseball, and you had managers, us doing some things, but then the whole infiltration of the major leagues coming along and extracting the players, the Negro League then went down. Well, I just thought that was pretty powerful. There's also an interesting, because like I said, this is a dynamic book. There's a whole bunch of jewels in here. But let me read this one part about it. It says, Paul Robeson, the Rutgers All-American, became a radical. Jim Brown organized African-American athletes to support, Jim Brown football, support Muhammad Ali, Ali, boxing, when Ali refused to step forward for the draft. In 1972, Jackie Robinson showed up at Yankee Stadium and said he would be contented only when there was an African-American manager in the dugout. When Kellen Winslow Sr. was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1995, he used the occasion to blast the NFL owners for closed-shop hiring practices. In 1996, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, which is talked about, refused to stand for the national anthem and was suspended. So he gives a list of people who've done the protests, who've tried to raise our consciousness, but if you don't know the names, what's the point in what they've done? We have to study that history. Smith and Carlos, we just talked about John Carlos at the '68 Olympics, stood in black socks and black gloves. Afterwards, Smith explained that the black socks symbolized the economic and social disenfranchisement of so many blacks in the United States. The gloves symbolized the mounting anger, frustration, and fury of so many African Americans, impoverished, brutalized, and marginalized in the world's greatest democracy. So as you heard Paul Robeson being grilled, they didn't even address any of those issues when he kept raising them. They ignored it like it didn't exist. The diversion tactics, that's how mind controls works. Do not address the issue at hand. Talk about this over here and then sucker punch you over here. 24 years later, Jordan made a stand, as quote, stand, unquote, of his own on the medal ceremony at the Olympics game. Jordan's protests, again in quotes, underlined the thickness of his blinders and revealed where his heart lay. Now, again, Jordan was also a teammate of Brother Kerry Hodges, who we talked about earlier. I was in Barcelona. This is now William Roden saying this. I was in Barcelona in 1992 for the Summer Olympic Games. These games marked the ultimate triumph of the NBA push for global presence. Barcelona was the NBA's Normandy, just speaking like World War. The 92 games marked the debut of professional basketball players from the United States participating in Olympic competition. They had been losing before. They got to stack the games. So they stacked the teams and they got NBA players now to play Olympics. This was the so-called dream team. But some of the things that happened were a nightmare for Pan-African sentiments. As when Charles Barkley, who's on TV now as a buffoon, said an opponent from Africa was concealing a, quote, spear, unquote, and told him to go hunting. This is one brother from the United States speaking to another brother from maybe the continent talking about he got a spear. The most telling part of the Dream Team's triumph came on the victory stand after the United States had crushed all competition. Rather than promote the team's official sweatsuit designed by Nike competitor Reebok, Jordan instead draped himself in the American flag, not out of patriotism or protest, but to hide the Reebok label, refusing to disrespect Nike. Jordan emphatically declared that, quote, I feel very strongly about loyalty to my own company, unquote. Contemporary black athletes have ridden the coattails of protest movements, benefiting from the sacrifices of the Robinsons and Jim Browns and Muhammad Ali's, but have been content to be symbolic markers of progress rather than activists in their own right, pushing progress forward. They have been unwilling to collectively rock the money boats. That's why they went after Kyrie. They have been unwilling to rock that money boat that is collectively. Ironically, this new lack of interest in the larger world has occurred just at the moment in their evolution when black athletes have more economic muscle and cultural influence than ever, at a time when they could actually own the boats rather than just rock it. The level of apathy is greater than ever before. This is now, so the Jordan model has created a malaise. And he wrote this back in 2006. Here we are now, 2020. What has changed? Had this piece in here about hockey in other countries. Canada primarily, because it says hockey is grappling with both its culture and the decline in popularity in Canada, the country of its birth. And black people used to play a lot of hockey. They created, from what I hear, you got a documentary on creating hockey as a sport. And this is talking about some black athletes. I hope you can see that. 2 black athletes. It says, you notice real quickly that you stand out when you're a minority player. It says Akeem Aliu. It's Aliu. Akeem Aliu, a Nigerian Ukrainian who went on to become a second-round selection at the Chicago Blackhawks in 2007 NHL draft. Ukraine? Nigerians over in Ukraine, you saw what happened with the Ukraine-Russian conflict, how the black people or melanated dominant people living in that area were totally discarded and weren't supported, trying to get out when the war was going on. They acted like, y'all get to the back of the bus, the back of the train. So here you got a Nigerian Ukrainian playing hockey. And this other brother named PK Subban, perhaps you've heard of him. A water bottle was thrown at PK Subban on the ice, and he was bombarded by racist threats on social media after he scored an overtime goal for the Montreal Canadiens to beat the Boston Bruins in the 2014 Eastern Conference Finals. Now, this is an article that was written 2019, December 2019, but it's just documenting how, athletes are being attacked. And, we can go all over the story about in soccer, and the brothers playing soccer in those European countries and being called a monkey and bananas being thrown at them. It's terrible. So again, that middle book, we just discussed that. Unforgivable Blackness. Definitely got to get that book. As you see what's going on with athletes when they speak up and they then get criminalized, commodified and criminalized. New racism in African Americans in contemporary sports. So again, if you had somebody like the author of whatever Kyrie had put out there with him, if you had people that were in the community that were talking about real history, if you had books to be discussed rather than just vilifying a person, you understand that this whole system is created on marketing. And so if you're not going to be with the enterprise, you become a danger. That's why they attacked him. I enjoyed this book because it has several articles about different things, from ice skating, the guy named Shawnee Davis who dominated in the Olympics. You got swimming, Simone Manuel dominated in her sport and her event in swimming. But there's a chapter here called Life with No Hoop, Black Pride, State Power. It's talking about what happened in Philadelphia with the swim team. And one of the great movies that I saw about this was called Pride, starring Terrence Howard. Get a chance to see Pride, that movie. It reveals the racism that those athletes had to deal with, but they dominated and were able to overcome. So that's what happens when we are given a chance. We can make it, but just these despised attitudes about melanin-dominated athlete. It's just terrible. Michael Bennett, football player, wrote Things That Make White People Uncomfortable. Bennett is a Super Bowl champion, a 3-time Pro Bowl defensive end, fearless activist, a feminist, an organizer, and a change maker. So he wrote this book to express some problems that he was seeing in the world, but just as an athlete. So Seahawks, dominant player, defensive player, and I think he went to Philadelphia. I think he might have had a stint with the slave driver at Dallas Cowboys. He said, don't you be talking that stuff here. Don't bring that here. So Michael Bennett wrote this book along with Dave Zirin. You see that other book there, A People's History of Sports in the United States. Got to get all of Dave Zirin's books. I have Dave Zirin wrote this book, but you look at the title, A People's History of Sports. He takes us from Howard Zinn, People's History of the United States. That's a must you must have in your library. But Dave Zirin I mean, he has several his podcasts. You can see his work in some, popular online sports columns. I mean, definitely get Dave Zirin's books. This is a People's History of the United States. People's People's History of Sports in the United States. 250 years of politics, protests, and people at play. And then his other books. I mean, again, I'm a fan of his work because he tells it like it is. Game Over: How Politics Has Turned the Sports World Upside Down. Even had a forward by Michael Eric Dyson. Look at chapter 9. I'm Not Your Child. Racism Today in Sports. I'm not your child. You think about what they made Kyrie do. He has to apologize before he comes back and play. Like put him in timeout like a little child. I'm not your child, though, is this article. This chapter in the book. And this was published in 2013. Welcome to the Terror Dome. Pain, Politics, and Promise of Sports. So almost going off of the whole hip-hop vibe. Because look at it. It's a forward by Chuck D. Got a little bit of stuff in here. Talks about KRS-One. Because, I mean, it's hip-hop. So, I mean, basically, Dave Zirin is at that age where he can appreciate the influence of hip-hop culture and how it has had impact on sports. But definitely get that. Welcome to the Terror Dome. And then we all know about Muhammad Ali. But he had the parody of, what's my name, fool? Muhammad Ali was at the forefront of really pushing the landscape to say, I'm not just going to shuck and jive. I'm not going to go fight a war for something that I don't believe in. Those people over there in Vietnam never called me a nigger, but the people here did. So what am I going to call and fight them for? So sports and resistance in the United States. So definitely got to get What's My Name, Fool by Dave Zirin. And then the other one, Bad Sports. Basically, just talking about how owners are ruining the game we love. And we see that going on where it would shoot from the Clippers and all these other coaches from what's the guy on the Raiders who was removed for his racist comments off the record. And so just the owners and the sports people who are controlling the slave owners and create a bad environment. And that's so if we're not going to have our own, I guess, sports leagues like we had with the Negro League, we're going to be in trouble. So read, and expose the enemy from within, because we do it to ourselves and also around you. There's also outside forces, but we have to be in a position where we can fight the power. Can't fight the power without having knowledge and information. So we must be able to be in a position where we understand the game that has been played on us. All the athletes, again, fast forward to what Naomi Osaka struggled with as a champion in tennis, and then she's trying to raise consciousness to other people in the world about problems that are going on with police brutality, and she gets attacked, and now her game goes down. So anybody that's able to speak up and just be truthful about what's going on in the world, not burying your head in the sand, be truthful. We must support them. So all those athletes that have gone on to protest and fight for the restoration of our history and upliftment of our humanity, not just for Black people, not for melanin-dominant people, but for people over the world. Much respect for those who have gone on, and basically dedicate this to you to keep on with that fight. So, power to the people to make a change. Thanks for listening.